I never thought I'd be sitting at my parents' Thanksgiving table again, especially not after what happened 3 years ago. My name is Olivia Chen, and the last time I was here, my father looked me straight in the eyes in front of our entire, extended family and called me a failure. "Such a disappointment," he said, his voice carrying across the dining room as conversations fell silent and everyone stared at their plates. "All that potential, wasted on your pathetic job." That night, I drove away with tears streaming down my face, promising myself I'd never put myself in that position again. Yet here I am, watching my mother arrange the turkey on her prized serving platter, my father adjusting the thermostat in the house that, unbeknownst to them, I completely own. 3 months ago, I paid off their entire mortgage without telling them, the same house they're so proud of, the same house where they humiliated me. As I sit here with my stomach in knots, I can't help but wonder if I should tell them that their failure daughter is now their anonymous benefactor, or if some secrets are better left untold. The weight of this knowledge sits heavy in my chest as I watch them move around their home, completely unaware that every step they take is on property that I secretly secured for them, even after everything they said and did. Growing up as the daughter of Chinese immigrants in suburban Connecticut shaped every aspect of my identity and relationship with success. My parents left Shanghai in the late 80s with 2 suitcases and advanced degrees that meant nothing in America, forcing them to rebuild from scratch while raising 3 children. From my earliest memories, the message was clear. Education was the only acceptable path to success, and success was the only way to secure parental love. My father, a former engineering professor who ended up working as a mid-level technician for 15 years before finally securing a position worthy of his expertise, channeled all his frustration into pushing his children to achieve what America had initially denied him. "Study until your eyes bleed," he would say in Mandarin, checking my homework with ruthless precision, tearing up papers with careless errors, making me restart hours of work for a single mistake. My mother, softer in approach but equally committed to this vision of success, would soothe my tears privately while publicly supporting my father's methods. "He only wants the best for you," she would whisper, applying cooling cream to my eyes, swollen from crying over calculus problems at 2 a.m. Our family home, a modest colonial they purchased when I was 10 after years of frugal saving, represented everything to them: stability, respectability, the American dream finally within reach. My older brother Michael sailed through their expectations, becoming a cardiologist, marrying a Chinese-American dentist, and producing 2 academically gifted grandchildren who were already winning math competitions in elementary school. My younger sister Catherine followed suit with a law degree from Yale, her achievements displayed prominently on what my mother called the pride wall in the living room. And then there was me, initially the star student, perfect SAT scores, early acceptance to Johns Hopkins pre-med, the child who was supposed to complete their immigrant success story trifecta. The day I got that acceptance letter was the only time I ever saw my father cry, his hand trembling slightly as he called relatives in Shanghai. "My daughter, the future doctor," he announced, his voice thick with an emotion he never expressed directly to me. Little did any of us know then that I would become the family disappointment, the cautionary tale relatives whispered about, the daughter whose framed achievements would slowly disappear from the pride wall, one by one, as I veered off their prescribed path toward a future they couldn't understand or value. The day I called my parents from my dorm room to tell them I was dropping out of medical school was the first time I experienced the cold silence that would later characterize our relationship. "Dad, I can't do this anymore," I explained, my voice shaking as I described the panic attacks, the dread I felt every morning facing another day of memorizing procedures that never excited me. "I've been accepted to a business program focusing on technology startups. This is what I'm passionate about." The silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected, until I heard my father's controlled breathing. "You will regret this," For the rest of your life, he finally said, each word precise and cutting. We did not sacrifice everything for you to throw away a respectable future on some computer games. My mother got on the line next. Olivia, please reconsider. Your father won't say it, but this is breaking his heart. That first year after leaving medicine was brutal. Sharing a cramped apartment with 3 roommates in San Francisco, working. Unpaid internships while taking night classes, watching my savings dwindle while my classmates from wealthy families networked at exclusive events I couldn't afford to attend. The first Thanksgiving after my betrayal, as my father called it, set the pattern for years to come. So you work with computers now? My aunt asked politely at dinner. Before I could answer, my father interjected, temporary situation, not worth discussing. When I tried to explain my role helping startups develop business strategies, my mother quickly changed the subject to my cousin's medical residency. Top of her class, she announced proudly, as if to remind everyone what real achievement looked like. That night, my brother Michael found me crying in the backyard. Give them time, he advised awkwardly. You've always been Dad's favorite. He just doesn't understand this new path. But time only deepened the wound. Each family gathering featured some version of the same humiliation. Pointed questions about when I'd return to a real career, uncomfortable silences when I mentioned small victories, relatives who once asked my advice now directing their questions to my siblings instead. When Peter, my boyfriend of 2 years, finally met my family and witnessed their treatment firsthand, something changed in our relationship. I can't believe you just take it, he said afterward. They talk to you like you're worthless. 3 months later, he ended things, citing the family baggage as part of his decision. The rejection hurt, but it also hardened something in me. A determination to succeed not despite my family's disapproval, but almost because of it. I threw myself into work, volunteering for the projects no one wanted, staying up all night learning programming languages, networking relentlessly at industry events where I was often the only Asian woman in the room. Gradually, I started making connections that mattered, impressing mentors who didn't care about my abandonment of medicine but recognized my analytical skills and business instincts. Still, each small victory felt hollow without my family's acknowledgement, and each visit home reopened wounds that never fully healed, leaving me in that peculiar immigrant child purgatory, unable to fully embrace my new life while yearning for approval from the old one I'd left behind. My career trajectory changed the day I met Sarah Bennett at a Women in Tech conference where I'd volunteered to save on the entrance fee. Tall, confident, with a reputation for transforming struggling startups into acquisition targets, Sarah waited until after her keynote to approach me. That question you asked about scalable infrastructure, it was the only intelligent one in the room, she said bluntly. What are you doing serving coffee at this event when you should be presenting? 2 weeks later, I joined her team at VisionScale, a startup developing AI solutions for supply chain management. Not exactly the glamorous tech job outsiders imagine, but with serious potential for growth. For the first time, I worked under someone who pushed me because she saw my capabilities, not to fulfill some predetermined expectation of who I should be. You have a unique perspective, Sarah told me during my first performance review. You think like an engineer but communicate like a natural leader. That's rare. My salary doubled within 6 months as I moved from analyst to project manager, overseeing teams developing solutions for Fortune 500 clients. The first time I received a bonus check with more zeros than I'd ever seen in my bank account, my instinct was to call my parents. Surely this tangible evidence of success would finally earn their approval. Instead, I called my therapist, Dr. Winters, whom I'd started seeing after the Peter breakup. They've conditioned you to seek validation exclusively from them, she observed. What would it look like to celebrate this win on your own terms? That night, I bought myself an expensive bottle of wine and sat on my apartment balcony overlooking the bay, making a private toast to my own resilience. When Vision Scale began preparing for potential acquisition, Sarah pulled me aside with life-changing news. As an early employee with stock options, I stood to make a substantial amount in the buyout. Start educating yourself about wealth management, she advised. Your financial life is about to change dramatically. I spent weekends taking investment courses, connecting with financial advisors, learning to navigate a world my immigrant parents had never prepared me for. One where money came not from decades of cautious saving, but from calculated risk and innovation. When the acquisition finally happened, I found myself at 31 with more money than my parents had accumulated in their entire lives. The painful irony wasn't lost on me. My computer games had generated more financial security than their revered medical career would have provided for decades. Through family gossip channels, I learned that my parents had been struggling financially. My father's retirement hadn't been properly planned, and the economic downturn had affected their investments. Their mortgage, refinanced to help pay for my siblings' education, was becoming a burden they hadn't anticipated in their golden years. At family gatherings, they maintained the appearance of stability, while privately selling possessions and cutting expenses. Their predicament crystallized for me during a rare phone call with my mother, when she mentioned they might downsize from the family home. The one tangible symbol of their American success story, the house where, despite everything, I'd experienced rare moments of belonging between the criticisms and expectations. 3 years ago, I arrived at my parents' home for Thanksgiving with what I thought would finally bridge our divide: news of my promotion to Director of Strategic Partnerships at Vision Scale, complete with a feature about me in a respected industry publication. I'd spent an absurd amount on hostess gifts, premium tea from my mother's hometown region, an expensive bottle of Beiju for my father, gourmet chocolates for the table. My hands trembled slightly as I rang the doorbell, rehearsing in my head how I'd casually mention the promotion during dinner, imagining, foolishly, my father's grudging pride, perhaps even an acknowledgement that my path had merit after all. My mother answered, her critical assessment of my appearance immediate though unspoken. The designer dress I'd purchased for the occasion registered as impractical, my professional haircut as trying too hard. "You're late," she said, though I was precisely on time. "Everyone's already here." Inside, the house hummed with the particular tension of extended family gatherings. Aunts busying themselves in the kitchen, uncles discussing politics in the living room, cousins showing off photos of children and spouses. My brother Michael nodded coolly from across the room, his perfect family arranged around him like a Christmas card photo. My sister Catherine immediately pulled me aside with wedding planning questions, her recent engagement the current focus of parental approval. "Dad's in a mood," she whispered. "The furnace broke yesterday. Don't mention anything about work, okay?" But avoidance proved impossible when we finally sat down to dinner, and my father, at the head of the table, performed his annual ritual of asking each child about their achievements. Michael detailed a complicated procedure he'd pioneered. Catherine announced making partner at her law firm a year ahead of schedule. When my turn came, my father's gaze slid past me to my cousin. "Stephen, I hear you're finishing your surgical residency." I cleared my throat. "Actually, Dad, I have some news too. The company I work for was acquired, and I've been promoted to director level." A brief, uncomfortable silence followed before my father snorted dismissively. "Director of what? Computer games?" My mother laughed nervously. "Olivia has always been creative with titles." Something in me snapped. "It's not a made-up title. I lead a team of 30 people developing AI solutions for global companies. The promotion came with stock options worth—" My father's hand slammed down on the table, rattling the dishes. "Enough. You abandoned a respectable medical career for this playing around with computers. Your cousin Stephen will save lives. Your brother improves hearts. Your sister protects people's rights. And you? What value do you contribute?" His voice rose with each word, face flushed with a mixture of disappointment and genuine bewilderment. All that potential, all our sacrifices, for what? So you can have a fancy title at a company no one has heard of? You are a failure, Olivia. A complete disappointment. The table fell silent. My aunt stared at her plate. My cousin Stephen examined his fingernails. No one defended me, not my siblings, not my mother who looked away with embarrassment, not the relatives who had once attended my science fair victories with genuine pride. Your grandfather would be ashamed, my father added, delivering the final blow he knew would cut deepest, invoking the memory of the man who had encouraged my early interest in mathematics, the only family member who had ever loved me without conditions. I stood up so quickly my chair tipped backward, crashing against the hardwood floor. "Excuse me," I managed, voice strangled, before grabbing my coat and purse, stumbling toward the door as my mother called weakly after me. In my car, parked 2 blocks away to avoid my father's criticism of my parking skills, I finally broke down completely. Ugly, gasping sobs that left my carefully applied makeup in ruins. The humiliation burned through me like acid, stripping away the last vestiges of hope that my family would ever see my worth. Through tears, I watched happy families through lit windows, imagining Thanksgiving tables where children weren't ranked by their achievements, where parents celebrated individuality rather than conformity. Something crystallized in me that night as I sat shivering in my car, a resolution that would shape the next 3 years. I would never again measure my worth through their eyes. I would build a life so undeniably successful by any metric that they would have to acknowledge it, not because I needed their validation anymore, but because I needed to break their power over me once and for all. The weeks following that Thanksgiving became a blur of contradictions. Professional ascent paired with personal collapse. During workdays, I functioned with mechanical precision, channeling all my hurt and rage into flawless presentations, strategic innovations and ruthless negotiation tactics that impressed even our most demanding clients. "Whatever's driving you, bottle it and sell it," Sarah commented after I secured a contract our competitors had been chasing for months. Nights and weekends told a different story. Panic attacks that left me gasping for air at 3 a.m., crying. Jags triggered by mundane reminders of family. A pervasive sense of unworthiness that no external success could touch. I finally followed through on Dr. Winter's long-standing recommendation to increase our sessions to twice weekly, where she helped me untangle the complex web of cultural expectations, immigrant-parent dynamics, and personal identity crisis underlying my breakdown. "Your father's rejection feels total because your entire sense of self was built around earning his approval," she explained during a particularly difficult session. "We need to help you construct an identity that doesn't require external validation from people who fundamentally don't understand your choices." The acquisition of Vision Scale finalized in February, transforming my stock options into actual wealth that my financial advisor described as life-changing money. Suddenly, at 32, I had the kind of financial security my parents had worked decades to achieve. The irony wasn't lost on me. The career path they had dismissed so thoroughly had yielded the very stability they had always preached as the ultimate goal. My first instinct was to share this vindication, to force them to acknowledge I'd succeeded on my own terms. But Dr. Winters cautioned against seeking validation that might never come. "Remember, their inability to value your path isn't about your worth, it's about their limitations." I limited contact with my family to brief text exchanges and declined invitations to Lunar New Year celebrations, focusing instead on building connections that nurtured rather than depleted me. Then came the phone call that complicated everything. My mother, uncharacteristically vulnerable, asking if I could recommend affordable contractors for urgent home repairs. "The roof is leaking, and the bank—" She paused, pride clearly struggling with necessity. "The refinance didn't go through. They said with Dad's retirement, we don't qualify anymore." Additional details emerged through family channels. My parents had refinanced their mortgage years earlier to help with my siblings' graduate school expenses, counting on continued employment that my father's health issues had cut short. The White House that symbolized their American dream achievement was now at risk, though they carefully hid this reality from relatives and friends. Through a series of discreet inquiries and one ethically questionable phone call where I posed as my mother to their mortgage servicer, I learned the full extent of their financial vulnerability. They were 3 months behind on payments, with limited retirement savings after helping my siblings and covering medical expenses not fully covered by insurance. One sleepless night, staring at my investment portfolio, a wild, possibly self-destructive idea formed. What if I paid off their mortgage completely? The amount, while substantial, represented only a portion of my new wealth. My financial advisor was bluntly opposed. This is financially unsound and emotionally questionable. They haven't supported your choices or acknowledged your success. Why would you do this? Why indeed? The question plagued me through meetings with attorneys to explore anonymous payment options, through conversations with a secondary therapist specializing in Asian American family dynamics, through meditation sessions attempting to distinguish between healthy generosity and self-destructive people-pleasing. The answer came unexpectedly during a rare call with my brother Michael, who mentioned casually that our father had been skipping his blood pressure medication to save money. He'd never admitted, of course. Mom told me accidentally. They're both too proud to ask for help. Something shifted in me then, a recognition that beneath my hurt and their disappointment lay a simple truth. They were still my parents, their limitations products of their own trauma and cultural context, their harshness born from desperate love and fear rather than malice. Their inability to understand my world didn't negate the sacrifices they had made to give me opportunities they never had. I could acknowledge the harm they'd caused while still recognizing the humanity behind it. After exhaustive research and legal consultation, I created an elaborate plan involving a private banking service that specialized in anonymous major transactions, allowing me to pay off their mortgage completely without revealing myself as the source. The story created for my parents was deliberately vague. A mortgage forgiveness program, targeting retirees of their demographic in their specific zip code, randomly selected from qualifying households. Executing the mortgage payoff required more subterfuge than any corporate negotiation I'd ever managed. The banking service I selected specialized in high-net-worth individuals requiring privacy, but even they seemed perplexed by my insistence on total anonymity. Usually, clients want recognition for their generosity, the private banker commented, sliding the final paperwork across his polished desk. Your parents will never know who did this? I signed the documents with steady hands, the culmination of weeks spent gathering account numbers, verifying property details, and creating a financial labyrinth that even the most determined investigator would struggle to trace back to me. That's the point, I replied, wondering if he could see the contradiction in my eyes, the desire to simultaneously punish and protect the people who had hurt me most deeply. The actual transfer happened anticlimactically on a Tuesday afternoon, while I sat in a product development meeting, my phone silenced as funds moved and documents processed. By Wednesday morning, my parents' mortgage company had received full payment for the outstanding balance, including penalties and fees. The paperwork informing them would arrive by certified mail within 5 business days, explained as part of a limited community reinvestment initiative. Language carefully, crafted by the bank's legal team to sound plausible without promising similar forgiveness to others who might inquire. For days afterward, I jumped every time my phone rang, half expecting my father's suspicious questioning or my mother's tearful gratitude. But the call never came directly. Instead, the news filtered through family channels. My sister Catherine, calling first. Something weird happened with Mom and Dad's house. They got some letter saying their mortgage is completely paid off through some banking program. Dad thinks it's a scam. They're meeting with an attorney tomorrow. I feigned surprise, asked appropriate questions, promised to look into similar programs. The following week, my mother texted our family group chat. Good news confirmed. House payment gone. Banking program for seniors in our area. Very fortunate selection. Dad says don't tell outside family yet until all paperwork final. The carefully neutral language couldn't hide the relief evident even in text form. Through occasional calls with my siblings, I pieced together the aftermath. My parents' initial suspicion giving way to cautious celebration, my father researching obsessively for signs of fraud before finally accepting this change in fortune, my mother crying when she shredded the budget worksheet where she'd been calculating which bills to pay late each month. My brother reported that our father had started taking his medications regularly again. My sister mentioned that our mother had finally scheduled the knee surgery she'd been postponing due to cost. These snippets of their improved daily life brought complicated satisfaction, pride in my ability to help, bitterness that they would never know to thank me, relief that their basic security was assured, anger that they had never supported the career that made this possible. With their most pressing financial worry eliminated, my parents' social presence expanded. They hosted more family gatherings, resumed their community activities, my father even rejoining his beloved traditional Chinese music ensemble that practiced in the living room of the now secure family home. Through distant observation via social media and family reports, I watched them reclaim joy in small ways, all while remaining completely unaware that their failure daughter had made it possible. Then came the text I hadn't expected. My mother, extending a Thanksgiving invitation with unusual warmth. We missed you last year. Your father asks specifically if you will come. The message included no apology for past treatment, no acknowledgement of the rift, just this simple indication that perhaps my absence had been noted after all. Dr. Winters helped me process my conflicted response. You can attend without expecting perfection, set boundaries, bring support if possible, prepare exit strategies if needed. When I mentioned I'd been seeing someone seriously, David, a user experience designer I'd met through work who knew my full family history, she suggested bringing him as both emotional support and buffer. Having a witness can change family dynamics significantly. The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving filled with preparation, not just emotional readiness with Dr. Winters, but practical strategies with David, who approached the situation with the calm, problem-solving mindset that had first attracted me to him. We'll take separate cars, he suggested. We'll have a signal if you need a break. We'll stay at a hotel, not their house. And we'll leave the moment it becomes unhealthy. His willingness to protect my well-being without dramatic declarations touched me deeply. Here was someone who understood boundaries weren't about punishment but self-preservation. As Thanksgiving approached, my anxiety manifested physically. Insomnia, stress rashes, a persistent knot in my stomach that tightened. Whenever I imagined walking through my parents' front door, would they notice the external markers of my success? The subtle designer watch? The confidence in my posture? The healthy glow that had replaced the stressed pallor of my younger years? Would they finally see me clearly? And the question that haunted me most. If conversation turned to their miraculous mortgage forgiveness, could I maintain my secret? Or would some unconscious desire for acknowledgement betray me? While carrying the weight of my secret benefaction, I constructed a life increasingly disconnected from my family's narrow definition of success. Vision Scales acquisition positioned me perfectly for my next career leap, Chief Strategy Officer, at TerraCode, a larger tech firm building infrastructure for sustainable urban development. The role came with public recognition my parents couldn't easily dismiss. Features in business publications, speaking engagements at industry conferences, a compensation package that would have stunned them had they known its details. I maintained a careful separation between this flourishing professional identity and my family role as the disappointing daughter, never sharing articles where I was quoted as an expert, never mentioning awards or recognition, maintaining the fiction that I was still struggling in my computer games career. This compartmentalization extended to my growing circle of friends and colleagues, most of whom knew nothing of my family dynamics. Only David witnessed the occasional 3 a.m. anxiety spiral after a terse text from my mother or another invitation, declined out of self-protection. "It's like you're two different people sometimes," he observed one night after talking me through a panic attack, triggered by a Lunar New Year card, where my parents had addressed me with a childhood nickname that suddenly felt like mockery. The confident executive everyone else sees versus this wounded child seeking validation they'll never give. His observation stung with its accuracy. David's family presented a stark contrast to mine. His parents, retired teachers from Michigan, expressed uncomfortable amounts of affection, texted constantly with updates about neighborhood cats, and book club selections asked genuine questions about my work and seemed baffled by the concept of conditional love. The first time his mother hugged me goodbye after dinner and said, "We're so happy David found you," I sat in my car afterward and cried from the simple acceptance I'd never experienced from my own parents. Their easy integration of David into family gatherings highlighted the painful exclusion I'd experienced in my own family. Our relationship deepened despite my lingering fears that family trauma had rendered me incapable of healthy attachment. When we moved in together after 18 months of dating, I finally shared the full story of the mortgage payment, something I hadn't disclosed to anyone except my therapist. We sat on our balcony overlooking the bay, wine glasses in hand, as I detailed the elaborate financial choreography and my complicated motivations. His response reflected the thoughtful perspective I'd come to value so deeply. "You did a genuinely kind thing from a complicated place. Both things can be true at once." He paused, considering. "Do you think you'll ever tell them?" I'd asked myself that question hundreds of times, imagining scenarios ranging from tearful reconciliation to angry accusations of overstepping. "I don't know. Sometimes I think the secret gives me power. I'm not ready to surrender. Other times it feels like a burden I'll never put down until they know." David didn't push for a resolution, understanding that some family wounds defy simple healing narratives. Meanwhile, my limited contact with family continued through obligatory birthday texts and occasional group calls, where I listened more than spoke. Through these distant connections, I learned that my parents' retirement had improved considerably since the mortgage miracle. My father had joined a Tai Chi group. My mother had taken up watercolor painting. They had even managed a modest trip to visit relatives in Shanghai. My brother Michael, during a rare one-on-one call, mentioned that our father had started speaking about me differently in my absence. "He saw your name in some technology magazine at his doctor's office. He didn't say much, but he kept the magazine." This small acknowledgement shouldn't have meant anything. I'd long since stopped measuring my worth through his recognition. Yet some stubborn, childish part of me stored this information like a precious stone, taking it out to examine in private moments. As another Thanksgiving approached, I found myself at a crossroads both professionally and personally. TerraCode was positioning for potential acquisition, which would trigger another significant financial event for me as a senior executive. David and I had begun tentative conversations about engagement, his patient understanding gradually dismantling, my fears of bringing my family baggage into marriage. And the most unexpected development? My father had begun reaching out directly, awkward text messages about weather and Chinese holidays evolving into brief inquiries about my work, never apologizing for past treatment, but demonstrating an unfamiliar attempt at connection. When my mother's Thanksgiving invitation arrived, followed by an unprecedented personal text from my father, "Your place will be set at the table. We hope you will fill it." David and I spent a long evening discussing whether attendance represented healthy reconciliation or self-destructive pattern repetition. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you," he promised, his steady presence the foundation that made me brave enough to consider returning to the scene of my deepest humiliation, carrying a secret that had simultaneously liberated and burdened me for nearly a year. The drive to my parents' house on Thanksgiving morning felt surreal, as if I were simultaneously 35 and 22, a successful executive and a perpetually disappointing daughter. David followed in his car behind mine, our agreed-upon backup plan if I needed a rapid exit strategy. The neighborhood looked smaller than I remembered, the once impressive homes now seeming modest compared to the upscale condo David and I shared in the city. My parents' house stood exactly as it had 3 years ago. The same carefully tended shrubs, the same burgundy front door, the same seasonal wreath that my mother probably purchased from the same craft store sale she'd been patronizing for decades. Only I had changed, arriving not in the desperately purchased outfit intended to impress, but in simple elegance that reflected authentic success rather than straining to project it. My hand hesitated briefly before ringing the doorbell, the weight of the Cartier watch on my wrist, a tangible reminder of how far I'd traveled from the weeping woman who'd fled this doorstep 3 Thanksgivings ago. My mother answered, her reflexive critical assessment visible in her first glance before registering genuine surprise at my appearance. "Olivia," she said, her voice carrying a note I couldn't interpret. "You look healthy." In our family's emotional lexicon, this constituted effusive praise. The interior smelled of familiar holiday scents: ginger, star anise, the particular blend of my mother's cooking with American turkey tradition. Family members already gathered and clustered. Conversations paused briefly to register my arrival, expressions ranging from curiosity to wariness. My father emerged from his study, moving more slowly than I remembered, the past 3 years suddenly visible in his stooped posture and thinner frame. His customary stern expression flickered with something unfamiliar as he approached. Uncertainty? Perhaps, or the closest approximation to warmth his reserved nature could manage. "You came," he stated simply, his handshake formal but lingering a moment longer than strictly necessary. The introductions when David arrived minutes later proceeded with painful correctness, my parents visibly assessing him with the particular scrutiny they reserved for potential family additions. His easy confidence and respectful but unintimidated demeanor clearly surprised them, especially when he responded to my father's questioning about his background in fluent Mandarin, a skill he'd been secretly developing over the past year specifically for this meeting. "Your young man speaks our language better than you do now," my father commented, the criticism automatic but lacking its usual sting. The initial hours passed in carefully orchestrated conversations, family members testing boundaries of our fragile truce. My mother proudly showed David photo albums that pointedly excluded my college graduation and adult accomplishments. My aunt inquired about my computer job, with the same tone she might use to humor a child's fantasy. My siblings maintained diplomatic neutrality, years of family dynamics making them cautious intermediaries. The careful equilibrium shattered. During dinner preparation, when my mother mentioned the recent completion of long-overdue kitchen renovations, prompting my aunt to comment on their good fortune with the mortgage situation. "Such a blessing from heaven," she proclaimed, helping arrange serving dishes. "Lynn and Edward worked so hard for that house. The bank forgiveness program was karma returning their good merit." My father, uncharacteristically emotional, added, "After working my entire life, I feared losing our home in retirement. This miracle saved us from shame." The conversation continued around the mysterious banking program, relatives speculating about selection criteria and whether connections through community organizations might have influenced their selection. David caught my eye across the room, his expression asking a silent question I wasn't ready to answer. As dinner began, the familiar ritual of achievement accounting commenced, my father inviting each child to share accomplishments since our last gathering. My brother detailed his department's research publication, my sister announced her successful argument before a federal appeals court. When my turn came, the table fell into expectant silence, the ghost of my last disastrous Thanksgiving announcement hanging palpably in the air. I began cautiously, sharing only the most basic outline of my professional advancement, watching my father's face for the dismissal I'd grown to expect. Instead, he listened with uncharacteristic attention, asking a surprisingly informed question about artificial intelligence applications. The conversation progressed through dinner with a strange new dynamic, my parents neither praising nor criticizing my choices, simply acknowledging them as legitimate. This tentative peace held until dessert, when my father, perhaps emboldened by 2 glasses of wine, made the comment that cracked my carefully maintained composure. Olivia has done better than we expected with her unconventional choices. Not traditional success, but adequate in its own way. The backhanded compliment ignited something in David, who set down his fork with deliberate calm. "I'm curious what you mean by traditional success and adequate," he inquired with deceptive politeness. From where I stand, Olivia's achievements seem rather extraordinary by any metric. My father waved dismissively. "In American business, perhaps. In our culture, certain professions have greater value and stability." The conversation might have continued in this vein, another variation of the same dismissal I'd experienced for years, except for what happened next. My mother, attempting to change the subject, mentioned their coming trip to visit relatives in Shanghai. "First time traveling freely without mortgage worry," she added. "The banking program was heaven-sent miracle." Something in her genuine gratitude, combined with my father's continued minimization of my accomplishments even after years of evidence, crystallized a decision I hadn't consciously made. "It wasn't a banking program," I stated quietly, the words hanging in sudden silence as all conversation halted. My father's forehead creased in confusion. "What are you saying?" David's hand found mine under the table, a silent support for whatever came next. Taking a deep breath, I continued. "There was no random selection, no community reinvestment initiative. I paid off your mortgage last year. All of it." The silence deepened as understanding dawned across different faces. My mother's, hand flying to her mouth, my father's expression cycling through disbelief, suspicion, and stunned recognition. "That's not possible," he finally managed. "You work in computers." The dismissive phrase that had diminished me for years now struck me as almost comical in its inadequacy. "Yes, Dad, I work in computers. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at TerraCode. Before that, I was a senior executive at VisionScale when it was acquired. My stock options from that acquisition alone were worth more than you earned in a decade." The bluntness of the statement caused a collective intake of breath around the table. "The pathetic job you mocked at our last Thanksgiving? It made me wealthy enough to pay off your house without significantly impacting my finances." My voice remained steady, not triumphant or angry, but simply stating facts long kept hidden. "Your failure, daughter, made sure you wouldn't lose your home in retirement." The aftermath of my revelation unfolded in waves of emotion around the table. My mother's silent tears, my father's rigid posture as he processed this inversion of our power dynamic, my siblings' wide-eyed realization that the family narrative had forever changed. No one spoke for several long moments until my father did something I had never witnessed in 35 years. He removed his glasses, set them carefully on the table, and covered his face with both hands. When he lowered them, his expression held a vulnerability I'd never been allowed to see. "Why?" he asked simply. "After how we treated you, why would you do this?" The question contained multitudes, acknowledgement of past harm, bewilderment at generosity undeserved, the fundamental confusion of a man whose worldview couldn't accommodate such contradiction. David squeezed my hand under the table as I formulated an answer that had been evolving within me for 3 years. "Because you're my parents," I began, the simplicity of the statement belying its complexity. "Because regardless of our differences, you sacrificed everything to give me opportunities you never had. Because your house represents your American dream, and I couldn't bear to see you lose it, even when you couldn't see or respect mine." My mother rose unsteadily and circled the table to embrace me awkwardly, her typical restraint crumbling. "We were wrong," she whispered, words I'd never expected to hear. "So wrong about everything." My father remained seated, cultural conditioning and personal pride warring visibly with emerging recognition. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of difficult truth. "In China, when I was young, there was only one path to security. Deviation meant poverty, or worse. I couldn't see that America offers different paths because I never fully believed in American promises." He looked directly at me for what felt like the first time in years. "Your success shames my narrow vision, not you." This wasn't a hallmark movie resolution. Decades of harmful patterns couldn't dissolve in a single evening of revelations. As conversation cautiously resumed, old dynamics occasionally surfaced. My mother reflexively comparing my sister's conventional choices favorably to mine, my father questioning whether technology careers had staying power. But something fundamental had shifted, a first crack in previously impenetrable beliefs. As family members helped clear dishes, my father approached where David and I stood near the living room window. "Your young man tells me you've been recognized in your industry," he said, attempting casual conversation that couldn't disguise his recalibration efforts. "There are articles?" This small expression of interest, not wholesale approval, but simple curiosity, offered a path forward different from both total reconciliation fantasies and complete estrangement fears. "Yes," I replied, matching his tone. "I can send you some links." My aunt, overhearing, mentioned she'd like to understand my work better to explain to relatives in China. My brother admitted he'd already looked up my company after seeing my name mentioned in a medical technology journal. These tentative connections weren't dramatic declarations of remorse or instantaneous family healing, but rather the first careful steps toward genuine seeing across the chasm of different values and expectations. As the evening concluded, my parents walked David and me to our cars, the November air sharp with approaching winter. My father hesitated before asking the question that clearly troubled him most. The mortgage, was it to prove something to us? The old me would have either denied this complexity or used it as a weapon. Instead, I offered honesty. Partly, yes. I wanted you to know I succeeded even without your approval, but also because I love you, even when that love feels complicated by everything between us. He nodded slowly, processing this duality that his more binary worldview struggled to contain. "We have much to learn," he acknowledged, the admission itself a seismic shift. "And much to discuss, if you are willing." The drive back to our hotel with David allowed space to process the evening's emotional complexity. "Are you okay?" he asked as city lights replaced suburban darkness. "I'm not sure okay applies," I answered truthfully. "I'm something more complicated, relieved, vindicated, exhausted, hopeful, realistic." He smiled at the nuance, one of countless reasons I'd grown to love him, all valid simultaneously. In the weeks following Thanksgiving, tentative new patterns emerged. My father sending articles about AI he'd found interesting. My mother sharing photos of her watercolor progress. Awkward but genuine efforts to connect across the divide of misunderstanding. I maintained boundaries while cautiously opening doors, sharing professional articles selectively, accepting an invitation to a Lunar New Year gathering while declining others that felt premature. The most profound change wasn't external validation, finally received but internal freedom from needing it so desperately. My worth no longer hinged on their recognition, allowing me to engage with them as flawed humans rather than all-powerful arbiters of my value. When David proposed 3 months later, my first instinct wasn't to measure my parents' potential response, but to evaluate my own readiness and desires. I accepted because our relationship brought genuine partnership and growth, not because marriage represented another achievement box checked. Telling my parents over video call produced predictably mixed reactions. Enthusiasm about a wedding face saving in the community, concerns about cultural differences, questions about children and surnames. But beneath these expected responses lay something new. My father's gruff acknowledgement that David sees your worth clearly, perhaps the closest he could come to admitting he hadn't. Their imperfect efforts at change didn't erase years of damage or guarantee future enlightenment, but they offered a pathway to relationship based on who we actually were, rather than who they had demanded I become. On particularly difficult days, when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, I remembered Dr. Winter's wisdom. Forgiveness doesn't require forgetting. It means freeing yourself from expecting people to be different than they fundamentally are. My parents would likely never fully understand my choices or celebrate my path with the enthusiasm they reserved for more familiar achievements. Cultural and generational gulfs would continue creating friction alongside genuine attempts at connection. True healing would require ongoing effort from all sides over years, not miraculous transformation through a single grand gesture. But in paying off their mortgage without expectation of gratitude or recognition, I had paradoxically paid off a different kind of debt, the emotional mortgage of seeking validation from people constitutionally limited in their ability to provide it. I wonder now, looking back at our complex journey, what lessons other first-generation Americans might draw from my experience. Was severing financial ties and expectations the necessary catalyst for healthier boundaries? Could genuine transformation occur without such dramatic confrontation? And for parents from immigrant backgrounds, what would it take to recognize the legitimacy of success models foreign to their experience? These questions have no universal answers, each family needing to find their own imperfect path toward mutual recognition. What's your experience with immigrant family expectations? Have you ever made a grand gesture to prove your worth, only to discover the most valuable proof was freeing yourself from needing to prove anything at all? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Thank you for listening to mine. And remember that sometimes our greatest success isn't measured by careers or bank accounts, but by the courage to define worth on our own terms while still extending compassion to those who taught us its opposite.